Yesterday afternoon, I'd been home for only about an hour, and I was just doing a quick check on my computer to check up on emails and the like, and came across a story. It was actually from the Associated Press, but it was picked up by the Washington Times, which is the leading alternative newspaper in the nation's capital. The Times being a conservative outlet and has been since its founding nearly 40 years ago. But the AP story says that in Idaho, that the repeal of Obamacare could cost taxpayers here $220 million in order to continue to support the healthcare exchange. Apparently, that's the amount of money they're sending us from the big treasury where they've confiscated tax money all over the country. The big treasury in Washington then sends it here. And the writer, being AP, now Washington Times, as I said, is conservative, but the Associated Press is about as liberal as you get. And then the writer says, but in Idaho, this program is among the finest in the country when it comes to the exchanges. Well, we'll have to find some sort of alternative, won't we? I bring that up today because there's been a lot of discussion about healthcare in the last 24 hours. We are in the last full calendar day of the Barack Obama White House, and then he's got half a day tomorrow, and then he has to vamoose. He's on his way to Palm Springs before he comes back and then settles in a large eight bedroom mansion in Washington. It's so expensive, he's now demanding that Congress give him a larger pension than other presidents have had. Good luck with that. Yeah, I understand the Republicans control both houses now. Well, what's going to happen is the media is going to say that Republicans won't do it because they're racists, and that somehow Obama needs some sort of reparations payment to top all of this. But I bring this up for the very reason of a couple of things over the last 24 hours that have jumped out at us when it comes to health care in this country. Yesterday, Tom Price, he's the nominee, and he's a doctor too, we should point out, medical doctor. Tom Price is the nominee for the Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services in Washington. And Price is a man who's been getting raked over the coals because apparently he owns some health stocks, as do most people on Capitol Hill, we should point out, as do a great many American investors. This is not unusual. But he was talking with the communist Bernie Sanders. Sanders was among the inquisitors on the panel that was vetting Tom Price. And listen to Sanders offer love for his country and his fellow Americans in this exchange.
The United States of America is the only major country on earth that does not guarantee health care to all people as a right. Canada does it. Every major country in Europe does it. Do you believe that health care is a right of all Americans, whether they're rich or they're poor? Should people, because they are Americans, be able to go to the doctor when they need to, be able to go into a hospital because they are Americans?
Yes, we're a compassionate society.
No, we're not a compassionate society. In terms of our relationship to poor and working people, our record is worse than virtually any other country on earth. We have the highest rate of childhood poverty of any other major country on earth, and half of our senior older workers have nothing set aside for retirement.
Oh, Bernie's such a friendly fellow. Before he ended up getting elected to public office, his first one was on the council in Burlington, Vermont, then mayor, then House of Representatives, and then U.S. Senate. Bernie was on welfare. I'm sure you knew that, right? Mainstream media has been very good about giving you all of his background, but there he is running down his country as being not very compassionate. Rand Paul, the Republican from Kentucky, was sitting not far away. Rand Paul is also a medical doctor, as was his father, Ron. And he was taking all of this in and decided he needed to respond.
One of the things that's extraordinary about our country is that just 2 years ago, in 2014, we gave away $400 billion privately, not the government, individually, to your churches and to charities. We're an incredibly compassionate society. And I think often this was misplaced in sort of the wonky numbers of this number and that number within healthcare. How much we do help each other. Not only do we help each other on our country, I'll bet you half the physicians in my community in Bowling Green have gone on international trips and done international charity work. And all that is lost in saying that we're this heartless, terrible country. And I would just argue the opposite. I think the greatness of our country and the greatness of the compassion of our country, we give away more than the gross domestic product of most of these socialized countries around the world.
Rand Paul speaking and refuting what Bernie Sanders said about Americans just being mean-spirited. So for 3 days, I've had a clipping sitting on my desk waiting for an opportunity to use it. We've had a very busy show this week with a lot of guests coming through the studio. But I wanted to get to this because, as I say, I printed this up, I think, Monday afternoon and knew I might get a chance to use it this week. It's from a think tank called the Foundation for Economic Education. And the headline is this. This would have been a good retort to Bernie Sanders. The headline is this: no, the rest of the world doesn't use single payer. And the writer is a fellow at this think tank named Eli Lehrer. Single-payer health care of the sort Bernie Sanders proposes, he says, isn't universal in the developed world, and the U.S. system isn't particularly free market by the standards of peer nations. Although definitions vary slightly, a single-payer health care system is one where a single entity, a government-run insurance plan, pays all bills for a variety of medical care, and private payment for these same services is more or less banned. Among the G7 countries, only one nation, Canada, actually maintains such a system. So Sanders says all the industrialized nations of the world, Western world or certain parts of Asia is what he's referring to, but it's not the case. It's not the case. Why hasn't media called him out on that? Well, again, mainstream media is filled with Sanders' fellow travelers, and telling you that would only allow you to think for yourself, wait a minute, Guy Sanders might be selling us a bill of goods. This writer, Eli Lehrer, then decides to go through this, and I'm going to give you a couple of other countries, too, as well. Japan maintains a government-run health care plan, but it has so many gaps that most families find it need to carry private insurance to cover things like cancer treatment-related costs the public system excludes. We also need to note that in Canada, where all those people say health care is free, no, because Canada controls only the payment, but not the doctors and nurses and the expenses of hospitals, Canada has to pay them all of their salaries. They don't work as slave labor. And you have to heat hospitals, and you have to make sure the brick and mortar are constantly repaired. So Canada collects the money from its taxpayers and then turns around and a government system launders it and then pays the costs. But you have to pay all of those people working in the laundry, too, that government hires to maintain the system. So that's an additional cost on your health care. But then again, Bernie Sanders conveniently leaves that out. Germany, the writer says, like the United States, has an employer-state hybrid system with heavy regulation of insurance companies. France has a dominant payer system where one quasi-governmental entity pays many bills, but about 90% of the population maintains private coverage as well, and most people pay something out of pocket each year. The United Kingdom, finally, directly administers almost all medical personnel and facilities through a single governmental entity in each of its home countries. That would be Scotland, Wales, England, and Northern Ireland. This is a single provider system, not a single payer, but a single provider system. The UK achieves its apparently enviable results because of long waiting lists for many procedures and healthcare rationing systems that are pretty close to the death panel some conservatives claimed were part of Obamacare. Now, in England, which we don't hear about often because, well, how many of us have friends who are dealing with this on a daily basis? I do. Actually, my friend Keith Gordon is from London. He's now living in the United States running a business, but Keith's mother had to go into a nursing home in England. And at the age of 93, the staff there forgot to feed and water her for 3 days. I just kept walking by the room, and nobody thought, she might need breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and maybe a glass of water now and then. And this is what happens in these big bureaucratic systems. In England, the government is not only paying the bills, but the government is setting the salaries for the doctors and the nurses, and it's setting the costs for the utilities that heat and cool the hospitals. It's setting the salaries for the people who actually sweep the hallways at the hospitals, cook the meals, deliver the meals, all of those things. So it is this giant government monolith, and yet you get what you pay for. I remember reading even on the BBC website, and the BBC is no conservative publication. It is very liberal. A story about a woman, she had breast cancer. So she said, all right, I need to get treatment, otherwise I'm going to die. And so she contacts the government, the National Institute of Health, or whatever they call it, and they tell her, well, okay, we can get you your first treatment 8 months from now. She said, well, I'll be dead. Well, that is possible, but we have a lot of people in front of you. And the only way we can control our costs without bankrupting the country is by putting you on this waiting list. but I'll be dead. Well, again, that's a possibility, of course, but you don't live forever. So for all of this talk from the American left about why we have to do this, Rand Paul's daddy, Ron Paul, got to be about 80 years old now and still living quietly in Texas, other than trying to sell you these freeze-dried machines, which you hear about during the course of the day here on KLIX. So you can have all your freeze-dried lasagna that till your heart's content. But Ron Paul himself had said, and there's a video still floating around the internet, I've cited it many times. He recorded it standing outside the U.S. Capitol about 10 years ago, saying if we return to the old government, getting them out of the, because going back to about Richard Nixon's era, we started having these things called health maintenance organizations, and then that was followed by some other attempts at PPOs and then Obamacare. But if we go back to the era when people actually used to have what we called indemnity plans, and generally provided through their employer, costs were a lot cheaper. The other part of this is, all of the plans we've come up with, we expect that our insurance coverage is going to pick up all of these, costs of visiting the doctor, and you figure, well, I'm paying into it. They need to cover all my expenses then. Why do I have to pay out of pocket? Well, I have car insurance, but the old adage is it doesn't take care of my oil changes or my tires or my transmission repairs. My car insurance is there for something catastrophic. I get into an accident. That's what it's there for. And yet we expect insurance, when it comes to health insurance, to be the be-all, end-all. The American system, this writer says, as it exists, isn't unusually free market either. The German, French, and Japanese systems, where consumers much more frequently shop around for insurance plans they like rather than having the government or an employer choose, offer more consumer choices than most Americans enjoy. Yeah, because in most American states, you only have one or two choices. Brand X or brand Y, and you can't go beyond that. But think about this. If we could shop for insurance among hundreds of providers or across state lines, wouldn't that reduce the cost if there was that type of competition? Wouldn't the insurers then be looking to attract new customers by offering some incentives and a break here and there? But again, we've got so much government interference that's been going on in health insurance in this country for the last 45 years, we simply don't know what it used to be like. We're coming up on a short break. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310. KLIX and newsradio1310.com. It's 33. Raining in some spots and probably snowing in some other spots across the Magic Valley. Snowplow came through our parking lot a short while ago, and it was like a Zamboni coming across it. You could put on skates and go out there and take a few turns, I swear. The weather today is going to end up about 36 for the high, and then the forecast says drop dramatically, so the icing will be with us for quite some time. Speaking of something that's going to be with us, Kelton Hatch from Idaho Fish and Game going to join us after 9 o'clock news this morning, right here on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com on Top Story. Do want to mention tomorrow morning, if you're going to be tuning in, a lot of you people I know would prefer probably television, so you can actually see. In radio, and there was a day we weren't even supposed to mention television as a competitor, but, he said television. I forgot all about it. I better go look at it. A lot of you will not have the opportunity to be near a TV screen, but you can be near a radio in many places, and so the goal is we'll be bringing you live the inauguration of President-elect Donald Trump, who will then be President of the United States following his swearing in. And, of course, being here in the Mountain Time Zone, that's actually going to take place between 10 o'clock in the morning and 10:05 in the morning tomorrow. So we're likely going to break from our gun discussion on the air a little early tomorrow, join Fox News coverage, and as I said earlier, I guess I was probably daydreaming about it, but I've been debating, because I'd have to step outside to do it. Times have changed, and you can't light up tobacco inside a workplace anymore. But I wonder, I brought this up on Facebook the other day, and I got more response to this than I think any item I've posted in months, that my preference would be, I'm not a smoker. I haven't used any tobacco, as I say, in 20 years. But I was thinking what I might end up doing tomorrow is buying a nice cigar. And then after hearing Hail to the Chief and the cannons saluting the new president, step outside and take a few puffs on that cigar as a means of celebration. And a lot of my friends are telling me they've got all sorts of celebratory plans coming up tomorrow. Hey, who can blame them? I mean, what we've been through over the last 8 years, even if you weren't a Donald Trump fan, look at what's leaving Washington. Well, he's going across town, but look at what's leaving the White House. And if you're, for instance, a religious person, the persecution is going to stop. And if you would like to use some land to graze cattle, you're likely going to be able to do that within a year. I mean, a number of things that are coming along, regulatory changes, and just the overall numbers on what people think is going to happen with the economy. Economic confidence is skyrocketing. And businesses that have been keeping about $4 trillion offshore since the Great Recession started 8 years ago are planning on coming back now. It could be glorious by the time we're all done. I want to remind people, if you're listening tomorrow morning, of course, you want to make sure that you can hear every word Mr. Trump is going to say in his inaugural address. And if you're having difficulty hearing, we recommend you get in touch with Dr. Christine Pickup. She's a doctor of audiology at Mount Harrison Audiology in Rupert, and she'd like to open your world to new sounds and experiences. A new hearing device is available, and it works with the brain to help those with hearing loss hear more naturally than any previous aid on the market. She's offering a free 2-week trial with these new devices, and you can call today and schedule your personal fitting appointment with Dr. Pickup at Mount Harrison Audiology. Open your world to better hearing. You can call Mount Harrison Audiology at 312-0957. That's 312-0957. So there are going to be a lot of changes in government. I was reading Charles Blow, uh, aptly named columnist, liberal columnist for the New York Times this morning, and writing, he says Americans should be alarmed about what's going to happen with the Trump presidency, especially because Trump is talking tough to the Chinese, who are trying to claim the Pacific is their own lake. Now, I don't think Donald Trump has any intention of warring with the Chinese. I think Trump is a far more call him a far more libertarian candidate when it comes to foreign intervention. In other words, he's not really big on it. He doesn't believe the USA should be the policeman of the world. He believes in a strong military as a deterrence, but he's not looking to fight everybody in every corner just because, well, they're being mean to somebody else who doesn't like us. But according to Blow, I mean, I was reading it, and you would think that we're all, those of us who supported Trump, that we're all polishing our jack boots and pressing our lederhosen and getting ready to go out with little clubs and beat people in the streets who aren't like us. And, it's one of those things when you look at it, you just scratch your head and wonder, where do the liberals get this mindset? The Trump derangement syndrome is just so out of line to what's actually taking place in this. These are the people who didn't like the military. These are the people who didn't like foreign interventions and foreign wars. These are the people who say we shouldn't be funding or paying for the defense of South Korea, Japan, and funding NATO's defense and Canada's defense. And now that someone comes along and says, yeah, I pretty much agree, how dare he? Well, yeah, you can't have it both ways. Talking a little bit about liberal derangement. Mr. Obama gave his final news conference yesterday as president. You know he'll be giving a lot more because he's going to spend the rest of his days criticizing Republicans in Washington. He said yesterday first of all, he's not the president of Israel. They have their own leader. His name is Benjamin Netanyahu. And yet, Mr. Obama, who claims the Russians were meddling in our politics, is continually meddling in Israeli politics. And now he's saying that the Jewish nation can't continue to be Jewish.
I don't see how this issue gets resolved in a way that maintains Israel as both Jewish and a democracy. Because if you do not have two states, then in some form or fashion you are extending an occupation. Functionally, you end up having one state.
Do you think anybody in Israel any longer takes this chump seriously?
The growth of the settlements are creating a reality on the ground that increasingly will make a two-state solution impossible.
Eric Erickson at the Resurgent.com says that Mr. Obama can now stop pretending that he's a Christian. In other words, even though it's not very important to liberals anymore, Obama at least had to have the veneer that he was a Christian when he was running for office on a couple of occasions. But Erickson says his administration argued before the Supreme Court that the freedom of religion guaranteed in the First Amendment was only a right to worship. They insisted that faith-based organizations pay for abortions. They allowed the gay community to sue Christian organizations trying to adhere to their beliefs. The latest is a gay man suing a Catholic school in North Carolina that dismissed him after he decided to marry a man. The president went to great pains to play down Christianity when it conflicted with Islam. The president and much of his administration refused for years to acknowledge violence against Christians around the world. And of course, attacking Jews is only the next step in all of that. Does make you wonder. I was never one of those people who believed he was a closet Muslim, but his antipathy to Jews and Christians, no wonder people believe that all these years. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and NewsRadio1310.com. Kelton Hatch joining us after 9 o'clock news this morning from Idaho Fish and Game.